The compound always carried a weight to it. Even when the sun was still low and the fog hogged the ground, there was a heaviness in the air. It wasn't just the smell of salt from the nearby coast or the sharp tang of metal from obstacle rigs baking in the morning light. It was the awareness that here men were tested to the breaking point. Every wall, every rope, every stretch of mud was designed to strip away comfort until nothing remained but grit. And on the far edge of that field, just outside the chain-link fence, he stood. At first glance, he looked like no one of consequence. An old man, maybe mid-70s, with shoulders that had begun to slope under the weight of years. His clothes were unremarkable. A flannel shirt faded soft by time, sleeves rolled neatly to the elbows, jeans frayed at the knees, boots that had once been tan but were now beaten to a gray-brown blend of leather and dust. His cap had seen better decades, its bill bent, the stitching on the front worn down to a blur. He didn't pace or fidget. He didn't call out to the instructors or offer advice. He just stood there, arms folded, watching. The recruits noticed him, though rarely for more than a moment. They had enough to worry about, lungs on fire, legs buckling under weight, instructors barking like thunderclaps in their ears. When your world is reduced to counting push-ups and trying not to pass out in the sandpit, one quiet old man behind a fence hardly registers. Some thought he might be a retired janitor who never left the area, or maybe a local who'd wandered too close out of curiosity. A harmless relic. Nothing more. But there was something about his stillness. Unlike the visitors who occasionally came for ceremonies or family days, this man never crossed the perimeter. He never leaned on the fence or tried to chat with anyone who passed. He planted his boots a few yards back, as if he understood boundaries better than the men who lived inside them. When the wind gusted, it carried grit across the field, stinging the eyes of recruits, forcing them to blink and flinch. The old man never moved. He stood as if rooted, as though the earth itself respected his claim to that patch of ground. Every Thursday, without fail, he came. He arrived before the instructors, before the first cadence echoed across the compound. The sound of his truck, an ancient Ford pickup, its muffler coughing tired protests, was as dependable as the rising sun. He parked in the same dirt spot just past the fence, slid out with the careful ease of someone nursing an old injury, and walked with a limp toward his station at the edge of the field. He never carried gear or binoculars, never a camera or clipboard. Only a dented thermos of coffee, which he nursed slowly as the day burned on. His limp told its own story. One boot angled slightly inward, the way bones sometimes heal wrong when you're too far from a hospital or too stubborn to let them reset it. Every step bore the echo of something broken long ago. And yet, once he reached his spot, he was immovable. From a distance, to the untrained eye, he could have been any man filling time with idle curiosity. But anyone who looked closely enough would see something else. They would see the way his eyes never wandered lazily. He tracked each movement on the course. When a recruit fumbled a rifle during a low crawl, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When a formation stumbled, his shoulders stiffened, just barely, as if he could feel the mistake in his own body. None of it looked like judgment. It looked like memory, like muscle trained too deeply to ever let go. The younger recruits dismissed him. They had no time for old ghosts. The older ones sometimes joked he came for nostalgia, maybe even guilt. Probably a dropout, one muttered during a water break, though not loud enough for the instructors to hear. The instructors never laughed. They never told him to leave, never asked his name, never treated him like a trespasser. In places like this, respect wasn't announced. It was recognized. And though they might not have known who he was, they knew enough. He had earned the right to stand there without explanation. He wore nothing that declared his past. No medals pinned to his shirt, no patches or pins that told stories of rank or campaigns. Just the cap, the flannel, the boots. The kind of clothes men wear when they're done proving themselves. But every now and then, when the wind pulled at his rolled sleeve, or when he shifted the thermos in his grip, the light would catch a patch of ink on his forearm. Most never saw it clearly. To many it was just the shadow of age, the kind of ink that bled and blurred over decades. But once in a while, When the angle was right and the sleeve lifted high enough, you could make out the shape. A trident. It wasn't oversized, wasn't dressed up with extra designs like the tattoos you see in magazines. It was sharp, simple, precise. The kind of mark you didn't buy on a whim. The kind you didn't even talk about unless you'd earned it in silence and sweat and blood. The trident of the Navy SEALs. Not the modern version plastered on posters and documentaries. The older one. The kind awarded when the teams were still shadow operations. When missions didn't have press releases and medals didn't always get issued. A version that meant little to the outside world, but carried unspoken weight among those who knew. That mark alone told the truth. This man was no wanderer. He wasn't lost or confused about where he stood. He was one of them. A brother forged long before any of these recruits had been born. And though he never said a word, his presence spoke louder than the instructor's bullhorns. Week after week, he stood at the edge of the compound, silent, watchful, untouchable. The recruits came to think of him as part of the landscape, like the rusted obstacles or the smell of diesel in the mornings. They sweated and bled, shouted and stumbled, and the old man watched, giving nothing away. But for those who truly saw him, there was a lesson there, as sharp as the trident inked into his skin. Sometimes the quietest man in the field is the one who carries the heaviest history. Myers was still learning how to breathe. That might sound strange for a 19-year-old who had run track in high school and thought himself in shape, but the compound taught him quickly that breathing wasn't about filling your lungs with air. It was about control. It was about forcing oxygen into muscles that begged for mercy while an instructor screamed into your ear that mercy didn't exist. It was about holding composure when you were face down in the mud, chest compressing under the weight of exhaustion, lungs searching for something that wasn't there. By the second week of training, Myers had stopped thinking of the obstacle course as a test of strength. It was a test of survival. Every day was a battle against his own body. And in the middle of it all, when sweat burned his eyes and the world narrowed to the next rep, he kept noticing him. The old man. At first, Myers thought it was a trick of his imagination. Plenty of locals drifted by the compound from time to time, curious about the grunts and shouts that carried across the dunes. But this man wasn't curious. He was deliberate. Always the same pickup, always the same patch of fence, always the same folded arms and motionless posture. Most recruits ignored him. They were too busy trying not to fail. But Myers had a knack for noticing things. Maybe it came from growing up in a small town where nothing much happened unless you paid attention. Or maybe it was because his father had been a cop who drilled into him that details were what saved lives. Whatever the reason, Myers couldn't shake the feeling that the old man wasn't just passing time. He was studying them. It started with little observations. During rifle drills, when someone let their weapon slip into the mud, Myers glanced toward the fence line. The old man's jaw tightened, almost invisible, but enough. During formation runs, when the unit drifted out of sync, Myers caught the slight stiffening of his shoulders, as if his body still remembered perfect cadence even after all these years. The instructors barked corrections, but the old man never said a word. He didn't need to. Myers began to think of him as a silent second layer of judgment. The instructors might punish mistakes, but the old man carried disappointment in his eyes, and somehow that cut deeper. It wasn't until the third Thursday that Myers saw the tattoo. The day had been brutal. The California sun was relentless, pressing heat into their backs like a brand. Instructors had them crawling under low wire until their elbows bled, then scaling the high wall until their hands blistered. The air was full of curses and grit, the kind of day that made rookies wonder why they'd signed up at all. Myers collapsed near the waterline, sucking air in ragged bursts when the wind shifted. It swept dust across the compound, tugging at shirts and caps. The old man lifted his thermos, sleeve pulling higher than usual, and for the briefest moment, the ink showed. Myers froze. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't even clear at first, just a dark shape etched into leathery skin, half faded by time. But then his eyes focused, and he saw it for what it was, a trident. Simple, precise, unmistakable. Every recruit had heard of it. Most had dreamed of earning it, though few ever would. The sealed trident wasn't decoration. It wasn't a tattoo you got drunk and decided on. It was the mark of someone who had endured the hardest training in the world and come out the other side. The kind of man Myers was still trying to become. But what stopped him cold wasn't just the symbol. It was the version. This wasn't the sleek, stylized emblem plastered on recruiting posters. This was older, sharper lines, harsher edges, a design that belonged to another era, back when SEAL missions weren't television specials, but whispers no one admitted happened. Myers' stomach turned with a sudden weight. He'd been treating the old man like background noise, like part of the scenery. But in that instant he knew the truth. This man wasn't a lost civilian. He wasn't a janitor or a retiree chasing nostalgia. He was one of them. A brother forged long before Myers was even born. The realization rattled him. That night, back in the barracks, Myers couldn't sleep. His body ached from drills, his muscles twitched with fatigue, but it wasn't pain keeping him awake. It was the image of that ink, the quiet authority in the old man's stare. He'd seen fakes before, men parading around town in uniforms they hadn't earned, claiming medals they hadn't bled for. They always talked too much, boasted too loud, hungry for recognition. This man was the opposite. He said nothing, wanted nothing, and yet his silence carried more weight than any speech Myers had ever heard. The next morning, Myers found himself searching for the old man again, not just in passing, but with intent. Every time the course circled near the fence line, he glanced over, half hoping to catch another glimpse of the tattoo. The old man never moved, never broke his stance. But once, when Myers nearly tripped on the rope line, he swore the man's head tilted slightly, just enough to signal that he'd noticed. It wasn't encouragement, not in the traditional sense. But somehow it made Myers push harder. The days blurred together. Sweat, sand, the sharp bark of instructors, and always the presence on the edge of the field. The others still joked about him, called him Grandpa Watchdog or Ghost of Lane 4. But Myers stayed quiet. He knew better now. He started to feel like he was carrying a secret. Whenever the old man shifted his weight, whenever the breeze lifted his sleeve, Myers found himself staring, memorizing the lines of the tattoo. He didn't tell anyone. He wasn't even sure he could explain what it meant. But something inside him had changed. Because once you realize a ghost is real, you stop laughing at shadows. The mystery deepened his resolve. When exhaustion clawed at him, when his arms trembled and his chest screamed for air, Myers thought of the old man's silence. If that man had carried the trident through a world darker and harsher than this training yard, then Myers could survive one more lap, one more crawl, one more impossible climb. It was no longer just about proving himself to the instructors. It was about being worthy of the quiet judgment watching from the fence. He didn't know his name. He didn't know his story. All he knew was this. Some men wore history in their silence, and the old man carried enough of it to shift the air around him. And Myers wasn't sure whether that terrified him or inspired him. Myers woke twice before midnight, the kind of false waking that feels like the body trying to quit. He lay on his back and watched the green exit sign paint a faint rectangle on the ceiling. Around him the barracks breathed in unison. Boots thudded in a dream. Someone coughed. A locker hinge ticked as metal cooled. His muscles throbbed in small pulses where rope had eaten into his forearms. The ache told him to sleep. His head refused. He kept seeing the ink. He tried the old tricks. Count the breaths. Match the count to the rise and fall of his chest. Clear the mind. The image of the trident did not clear. It sharpened. The old man's arm. The neat cuff. The brief flash of lines that spoke louder than any shout. At 2, he gave up. He rolled out as quiet as he could and slid his feet into cold running shoes. The floor stole heat from his skin. He walked the narrow aisle between bunks and palmed the door latch so it would not clack. The night air outside was cool enough to make him shiver. It carried the steady hush of the ocean and the faint motor hum of a generator behind the mess hall. The rec room lights were off except for the vending machine. Its compressor buzzed and the glass threw a blue rectangle across the floor. There was a coffee ring where someone had set a cup and missed. He flicked on one desk lamp and sat at the corner computer. The fan word. The old keyboard rattled when he typed in his credentials. He told himself he was not snooping. He also knew he was crossing a line. Not a legal line. A personal one. The base intranet greeted him with the same bland menu he always saw. Schedules. Training materials. Access to the library database. A link for visitor coordination. He hovered over that last one and felt a pinch in his chest. He clicked anyway. The form asked for dates and names. He had neither. He put in a wide range and set the location to the compound perimeter. There were hundreds of hits. Families during graduation weekends. Contractors for the obstacle rigs. Medical teams. Nothing like him. He refined the filter for recurring entries. The list shrank to a handful. One jumped out. It was small. Almost nothing. A set of initials. T. Harrow. Status, retired. Purpose, observation. No sponsor listed. He clicked. The file did not open. A notice popped up instead. Fields restricted. Authorized personnel only. There was a small mercy beneath it. A remarks line that was not locked. It read like a whisper. Cleared for silent observation. No engagement. He read the line 3 times. He could almost hear it spoken. Someone with rank had written that and meant it. Show him the respect due and do not make him explain. The entry was 2 years old. Below, it was a note that the clearance had been renewed annually. There was no end date. No phone number. No photograph. Myers leaned back and rubbed his eyes until he saw stars. He could have stopped. He should have. He did not. He clicked through to training archives. The folder tree felt like walking into a dark building with a small flashlight. Everything labeled. Everything gray. He opened a memo from a training overhaul in 2003. Most of it was bone dry. Schedules, drown-proofing revisions, safety notes, logistics. Then a paragraph near the end pried his heart open. Consultant. Harrow, so one read. Input used for early deep recon doctrine adjustments. Foundational operator during transition period. No service number on file. The words were plain. The meaning was not. Foundational operator. No number on file. It was a tidy way of saying this man existed where records did not like to follow. Myers scrolled. A footnote pointed to an oral history project that had never made it past a pilot phase. He copied the link and followed it into a page that looked abandoned. There was a single entry for SEAL Team 2. Year, 1970. Location, Laos. Mission type, deep penetration. Outcome, classified. Debrief, denied. Names, redacted. One exception. Field lead. Last name Harrow, initial T. He stared until the page blurred. He had learned the basic outline of that era in classrooms that never said much. People called it a secret war because that was simple. The truth was uglier. It had spread across borders that did not exist on maps you could show the public. Men crossed into valleys that had no names and came back older in a week than most men get in a decade. Some did not come back at all. Some came back and never found the right words, so they stopped trying. He looked at the clock. It was almost 3. He felt like he had stepped into a room he was not invited to enter. He tried to imagine the old man in 1970. Younger than Myers was now. Bones not yet bent. The same eyes, maybe. The same stillness. He pictured a small team moving through jungle at night. Rain coming down in sheets, radios whispering in code. He saw a hand signal nobody taught in the modern course. He saw men holding their breath in knee-deep water while boots slid past them on the bank above. He shut his eyes and let the picture fade. He was guessing. The reality was locked behind black lines and missing numbers. But the shape of it was enough. It changed the way he felt his own sweat. His training had always hit him like a personal storm. He had measured hardship by his own fatigue. Now the scale felt wrong. Too small. The old man's silence stretched the horizon. The moral question arrived like a knock. He was hunting a ghost who had chosen to be quiet. Was that fair? Was it respectful? He wanted to know more, but what did he intend to do with it? He did not want to expose anything. He did not want to post stories or pass around rumors. He wanted to stand straighter when he passed the fence. He wanted to be the kind of man who would not make a hero talk when the hero preferred not to. He opened a blank text note and wrote down 4 lines so he would not pretend later that he had forgotten them. Visitor log, T. Harrow. Silent observation. No engagement. Training memo, 2003. So 1, foundational, no number. Oral history, Team 2, Laos, 1970. Deep penetration. Debrief, denied. He read them once. He saved the note. He erased the browser history, more from instinct than fear. The lamp cast a warm circle on the desk. The vending machine clicked and turned itself off for a second. The silence that followed felt almost thick. On the way back to the barracks, he cut across the parade ground. The flag above the pole hung limp. He paused and looked toward Lane for where the fence bent slightly around a post. In his head, he placed the old man there, shoulders squared, arms crossed, one boot turned in, watching, not judging, holding the line because that was what he knew. In the morning, the instructors hit them with log PT until the sand stuck to their teeth. Myers fell twice and got back up like he had a string tying him to the next rep every time he thought about quitting. He pictured the line in the memo. Foundational operator. The words did not puff him up. They pressed him down in a good way. They put weight where it belonged. He considered telling someone. Not the details. Just the name. He brought it up to Cartwright during a chow break in the shortest way he could. "You ever wonder about the old guy at the fence?" he said. Cartwright snorted and stabbed a fork into eggs that tasted like rubber. "I wonder when they will ask him to pay rent." Myers let it hang. He was not ready to share what he had found. He was not even sure he had any right to hold it. He kept it like a coin in his pocket that he did not want to show yet. On Thursday, the truck appeared before sunrise. The sky was purple at the edge, and the compound lights looked like floating halos in the fog. Myers caught himself quickening his pace as he jogged to formation. He did not look at the fence right away. He waited until they turned toward the rope climb. There he was. Same stance, same thermos, same cap that hid his eyes and somehow did not. Myers noticed something new because he was looking for nothing. The old man's head moved very slightly when the instructors called a cadence change. It was not approval. It was recognition, as if his body still kept time with a rhythm that had not gone out of fashion in his bones. A few minutes later, a recruit down the line lost his grip and dropped. The old man did not flinch. He watched the instructor kneel, check, and send the kid back up. When the recruit made it to the top on the second try, the old man shifted his weight and set his thermos down for a second, and then picked it back up. It read like a nod if you wanted it to. It also read like nothing. Myers took the first reading because he needed it. He finished the day feeling cleaner inside, which was funny because he had never been dirtier. Sand stuck in his ears and scalp and under his nails. The hot water in the showers smelled like iron. He stood under it until someone yelled for him to move. That night, he went back to the rec room. He did not click on restricted files. He did not search new names. He opened his note and read the 4 lines again. He added a 5th. Do not ask him to speak. Earn the right to listen. He thought about walking up to the fence and saying his own name. He pictured the old man looking at him and saying nothing. He decided he did not need words yet. He needed more days of work that would let him meet the man's eyes without shame. The moon was a thin slice over the motor pool when he stepped outside. Somewhere a radio played a song from years before he was born. The air smelled like rope and salt and the faint sweetness of cut grass near the admin building. He felt tired in a way that did not scare him. On his bunk, with a green rectangle on the ceiling back where it always was, he saw the jungle again, only this time he did not guess as hard. He let the picture soften until it became a feeling. A small team. A job that could not be written down. A man who returned to a field of kids and chose to stand quietly and see if any of them would notice what mattered. Myers understood something new as sleep came for him. Curiosity had pulled him to the keyboard. Respect would have to tell him when to stop. He had enough for now. A name. A hint of history. The knowledge that his training lived in a shadow larger than any obstacle on the yard. He turned to the side and the springs creaked. He thought, just before he dropped under, that some silence is not emptiness. Some silence is a full room you enter only after you wipe your boots and take off your hat. Thursday arrived with the usual rhythm. The grind of boots at dawn, the bark of instructors, the sharp smell of sweat and diesel mixing in the morning air. But for Myers, it was different. Ever since he had unearthed those fragments of history, the visitor log, the memo, the oral history file, he could no longer see the old man as a nameless figure in a flannel shirt. He wasn't just a quiet stranger watching from behind a fence. He was Harrow, a man whose story lived in the shadows, whose silence was carved from years of service that would never make headlines. That morning, Harrow stood in his usual spot. Same battered Ford pickup parked at the dirt edge. Same limp in his stride. Same folded arms. From a distance, nothing had changed. But something had. Myers felt it in the pit of his stomach, a tension that wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was reverence. It was weight. The atmosphere shifts. The instructors were harder on them that day. The cadence felt sharper, the drills longer. Myers thought at first it was coincidence, but as he scanned the field, he noticed subtle changes. The Master Chief's voice wasn't just commanding. It was deliberate, almost respectful, as though the man's presence at the fence demanded precision from everyone. During rope ascent drills, Myers caught sight of two instructors near the fence line. Normally, they would pace with clipboards, yelling corrections. Instead, both had stopped. They weren't talking. They weren't writing. They were just standing still, watching the old man. No acknowledgement passed between them, no salute, no nod, but their eyes said enough. They knew. It spread quietly. By midday, Myers noticed the whole compound seemed tuned differently. Recruits moved with tighter posture. Mistakes still happened, but the grumbling stopped. Nobody said, "Grandpa's back." Nobody dared joke. The laughter that sometimes punctuated long runs was absent. The silence wasn't heavy, though. It was steady, like a drumbeat everyone suddenly marched to, even if they didn't know the tune. A silent line. Late afternoon, the sun bled across the field in a haze of gold. The recruits staggered through their final drill, breath ragged, uniforms dark with sweat. As they collapsed onto benches near the barracks, Myers stayed behind. His body screamed to rest, but his eyes pulled toward the fence. Harrow was still there, unmoving, his cap shadowing his eyes. The thermos hung loosely in his hand. He looked, as he always did, like a man apart from time. Then it happened. One of the instructors, a senior petty officer, broad-shouldered, with a silver star buried somewhere deep in his service record, broke from the group. He walked slowly toward the perimeter. He didn't call attention to himself, didn't speak a word. He stopped 10 feet from Harrow and stood at attention. Perfect posture, chin raised, hands at his sides. Seconds later, another instructor joined him. Then a third. Then more. One by one, without command or explanation, they formed a silent line across the compound facing the old man. No salute. No orders. Just presence answering presence. Myers felt his chest tighten as he watched from a distance. It wasn't ceremony. It wasn't spectacle. It was recognition. A wordless acknowledgement that this man, this ghost in flannel, deserved more than casual glances and whispered rumors. The recruits who lingered nearby went quiet. Even the greenest among them understood instinctively. Something sacred was unfolding. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. They just watched as the line of instructors stood still, eyes fixed on Harrow. The refusal. The moment stretched. Harrow didn't move. His arms remained folded, his face unreadable in the fading light. Finally, he shifted, turning toward his truck. He opened the door with a slow, deliberate motion. For a heartbeat, it felt like the spell might break. Then a voice cut across the field. Calm, grounded. It was the Master Chief. "Sir," he said, not with command, but with respect. Would you consider speaking to the recruits next week? The air hung still. Harrow paused, 1 foot already in the cab. He looked back, just slightly, his face shadowed under the brim of his cap. When he spoke, his voice was low, final. Nothing to say. He stepped into the truck, shut the door softly, and drove away. The tires crunched gravel, leaving a slow trail of dust behind him. No one moved. The instructors held their line until long after the pickup disappeared down the dirt road. Only when the silence grew too deep did they finally turn and walk back to the compound, still saying nothing. The aftermath. That night, the barracks buzzed with quiet speculation. Recruits whispered, trading half-formed theories. Some claimed the instructors knew him personally. Others thought he was a legend, a name tucked into stories no one dared tell aloud. Myers listened, but said nothing. He didn't need to. For him, the day wasn't about mystery anymore. It was about confirmation. The respect Harrow commanded wasn't written on paper or handed down in orders. It was lived. It was recognized by men who knew the weight of sacrifice because they carried it too. The next morning, training resumed as usual. Instructors yelled. Recruits stumbled. Sweat still poured into the dirt. On the surface, nothing had changed. But Myers could feel it. Beneath the noise, the compound was different now. Every man who had seen that line of instructors would remember it. They would carry it the way Myers carried the image of the trident on Harrow's arm. Not as a story to brag about, but as a lesson etched into silence. Respect is not demanded. It is earned. And when it's real, you don't have to explain it. A small act. 2 nights later, Myers and 2 teammates slipped out after lights out. They carried no weapons, no gear, just a small brass plate polished by hand. They moved to the fence line near Lane 4, where Harrow always stood. Working quickly, they bolted the plate into the post at eye level. No names, no dates, no grand gestures, just 5 simple words. Reserved until he says otherwise. They said nothing when it was done. They didn't need to. The following Thursday, Harrow returned. Same boots, same thermos, same stance. He walked past the trucks, past the field, and paused just briefly when his eyes caught the new plaque. He didn't touch it, didn't smile, didn't react. He just looked at it for a moment, then turned back to the course and resumed his silent watch. But Myers noticed something. For the first time, every recruit who passed near the fence line straightened their back. Not because they knew the story, not because they knew his name, but because they felt what he represented. And for Myers, that was enough. The first Thursday Harrow didn't show up, the compound felt strange. It was subtle at first, just an absence at the edge of the field. The rusted Ford pickup never rolled into the dirt lot, no steady limp crossing toward Lane 4, no folded arms against the fence line. The recruits told themselves he'd be late. Maybe the old truck had finally given out. But the hours passed, the drills ran long, and the space where he always stood remained empty. The instructors didn't mention it. They carried on, barking commands, driving the recruits harder than ever. But the silence between orders hung heavier than usual, as though everyone felt the missing weight of that watchful presence. A week went by, then another. Still no truck, no cap, no thermos. By the 3rd Thursday, the recruits stopped pretending it was coincidence. Something had shifted. The plaque remained on the fence, shining faintly when the sun caught its surface, but Harrow was gone, waiting for ghosts. Myers tried not to dwell on it, but the absence gnawed at him. Every drill near Lane 4 felt incomplete, like running a race without a finish line. His body was stronger now, his endurance sharper, but the sight of the empty fence left a hollow spot he couldn't shake. He remembered the night he dug through restricted files, the fragments of history that painted Harrow as more than just a man. A ghost of wars unspoken, a foundational operator. And now that ghost had vanished, leaving only questions Myers couldn't answer. The recruits whispered, but carefully. Some suggested illness. Others said maybe the Navy had finally closed whatever quiet permission allowed him to stand there. One bold soul muttered he'd probably died alone somewhere, and the barracks went still until someone shut him up. Even jokes had limits. For Myers, the silence carried something deeper. Harrow had never asked to be remembered. He'd come and gone without explanation. And yet his absence felt like a test in itself. Could they carry forward what he had given them, even if it was only silence? Lane 4. One evening, weeks after Harrow's last visit, Myers found himself drawn to the field after hours. The compound was quiet, empty except for the rustle of flags in the breeze. He walked across the gravel, boots crunching softly, until he reached Lane 4. The fence post stood where it always had, weathered and unassuming. The brass plaque gleamed faintly in the twilight, reserved until he says otherwise. Myers folded his arms, mirroring the stance Harrow had taken so many times. He tried to imagine what the old man had seen during those long hours of observation. Recruits stumbling, instructors shouting, sweat and grit marking every inch of the course. Did he measure their worth? Did he look for echoes of his own brothers from decades past? Or did he simply stand in silence because silence was the only language left to him? The thought pressed down on Myers until he felt the need to do something, anything. He turned to leave, and that's when he noticed it. A small envelope taped carefully to the back of the fence post, hidden from casual view. His name was written on it. Just Myers. No rank. No title. His hands shook as he peeled the tape and slid the envelope free. The paper was worn, softened by weather, as if it had been waiting. Inside was a coin. Old. Heavy. Scratched by time. One side carried the trident, sharp, precise, unmistakable. The other side bore no words, only a single hand-etched line. Still watching. Myers closed his fist around it. The metal was cool, solid, real. A piece of history, passed down without ceremony. The lesson in silence. He never found out who had left it there, or when. None of the instructors claimed to know. Nobody spoke of Harrow again, not openly. His name faded back into whispers, his story swallowed by the silence he had carried all along. But Myers didn't need confirmation. He understood now. Harrow had never come to be remembered. He had never stood at the fence to relive his own past. He had come to measure the future, to see if the next generation was ready to bear what his had carried. And when he disappeared, he left them more than stories. He left them discipline, responsibility, the reminder that presence teaches louder than orders, and that some legacies are built not in medals or books, but in silence. Myers slipped the coin into his pocket and felt its weight against his thigh. It wasn't a burden. It was a promise, carrying the legacy. In the weeks that followed, Myers trained harder. He double-checked his form, pushed past exhaustion, held his posture with sharper precision. Not because anyone demanded it, but because he owed it to the silence at the fence line. The plaque remained. Recruits came and went, many never knowing who it was meant for. But those who had seen Harrow, who had felt the shift in the compound the day the instructors stood in line, carried the memory like a hidden coin of their own. They didn't speak of it. They didn't need to. Some men leave behind books, ceremonies, and monuments. Others leave behind nothing but the echo of their presence, and the discipline they demand simply by existing. Harrow belonged to the latter. He had lived as a ghost and left as one, fading into the lives of those who noticed, shaping them without a single word. Myers never saw him again. But every time he crossed the field, every time his boots hit the dirt of Lane 4, he felt it. The watchful silence, the invisible weight reminding him to straighten his back, to carry himself, as though someone was still measuring. Because some warriors don't need to speak. They don't need recognition. They simply stand, and the world around them learns how to listen. And long after they're gone, their silence remains.